Hello. So this one might get spicy. I don't know. um, yeah. Let's talk some things before we get into topic. Um, what kind of fish related updates do I have? I did a lot of non fish stuff last weekend, but started getting this thing prepped to get it out, and then subsequently I've got to get rid of this big thing here. Um, I'm not sure what's going to go up in its place and when, but eventually I'll have a fish tank behind me again. I have like a 20 long that sits over that way on a stand, but that's going to go to brother-in-law James because he has a new project, and I'll talk about it a little bit. So, brother-in-law James really wants a puffer, and for those that don't know, he started doing some live streaming, game streaming recently, and his game streaming name, I think username, screen name, whatever you want to call it, right, is Magic Puffer. So he kind of wants to have a tank with at least a puffer. And what we talked back and forth about some of the ones he was interested in, and what we ended up on is like him getting my 20 long that's over there and turning it into a pea puffer tank, right? So kind of an easy start. Originally, he was kind of looking at like Amazon puffers, and I cautioned him that their teeth grow the fastest, and that's where some of the risk is. And rather than look at like a more expensive, like the Congo spotted puffer or some of the bigger puffers, let's start with pea puffers. Do your research first. I kind of gave him a caveat that he has to. You might find this funny. He basically has to give me the akin of a presentation, a small one, right, on puffers, just to show me that he's done enough research to understand the difference in the care requirements for a puffer compared to his current tank, and then we'll start going about getting all the things set up, letting him aquascape it, put plants in it, and then eventually buying some pea puffers. And we might put some other stuff in there with the pea puffers, but I've kind of tried to get him up front with just like, let's just start with only pea puffers and let them have a tank to themselves, and then you can have more of them, right? I think we're going to do something like 6 pea puffers in the tank, 5, 6, somewhere in that range. We'll figure that out when it gets to that point. But so that's his next kind of project. So he's trying to figure out space in his room and where he can put the tank and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Okay. Uh, yeah, other than that, it's like this tank's coming down and going away. Eventually, I'll be replacing my desk because my desk is basically a plastic folding table. It's old, it's beaten, it needs to be replaced with a more proper desk. And I also want to change to, since I'm totally working from home now. I used to not work from home, right? You guys well know I worked a ton and dealt with a lot of traffic, but now that I work from home, um, although I work some weird hours, I want to get a standing desk so that I can do sometimes standing, sometimes sitting, just for health reasons and stuff like that. Because I think it'll be good for me overall. And every once in a while, like I need to get up and walk around and stretch my legs and do stuff like that. So it might be better to just like get a standing desk and stand for like 30 minutes to an hour, and then go back, sit for a little bit, and keep kind of alternating throughout my work day. But yeah, once that happens, then I'll have a new tank to replace this, or maybe I'll refurbish the Flex, get rid of the divider and all the stuff that is its current problems, and just kind of starting new, so to speak. Okay, I want to talk about the Colorado pet tax. So I didn't know about this until a comment over the weekend in one of my videos asking me to talk about it. And the good news is the bill that had been submitted in Colorado's House has already been pulled by its sponsor, basically due to overwhelming opposition and hearing about a number of problems it would cause. But how do I put this? Like non. This doesn't matter the side. of the political spectrum. It always seems like if somebody's going to write something like this, they're going to keep trying to make it happen, and they're going to try and shovel it in somewhere to be non-offensive. But I don't know. So let's start with what the bill, and I have a US ARC's webpage up if you're actually curious about reading some bigger details on this. That's probably one of the best examples. And there's a link to it really quick. Yeah, Callie, absolutely feel better. Get some rest. Get some rest. Being sick sucks. So, Colorado House Bill 24-1163 would add a new tax of $8.50, but potentially up to $25 on each pet. And it includes all animals, even invertebrates. Hey, quit barking. There's nothing. It's probably Uncle James going to the bathroom. My dog. She's like, I hear noise in the hallway. Bark. So Shantoto, who barks, would cost me $8.50. And this is a yearly tax. But here's the thing. Here's where this starts getting real crazy. It does not affect working or livestock animals. So as an example, if you had a horse or something else that was pulling things, any of your other standard livestock, like if you're raising sheep for wool or cattle for meat, etc., you would not pay taxes on those. And this kind of almost harkens back, funny enough, to ancient reasons why corgis have their tails docked. If you don't know, the corgi is a sheepdog. And a way that they used to skirt some pet taxes in Wales way back in the day for a lot of these sheep herders and stuff is if the dog had a tail, it was considered a pet. And that's part of it. Also, they're working dogs, but when they were docked by tradition, it meant that they were a working animal and not a pet animal, and thus you did not have to pay taxes on them. Which sounds crazy that something semi-modern like that would start to occur. And I only say that because, of course, I'm biased. I have corgis. But here's where it starts getting crazier. So if we were to think about it that way, $8.50 per animal per year includes invertebrates. So if you have snails in your tank, even if you didn't want them, you now in theory have to pay $8.50 per year for every snail. But wait. It also requires every pet to be registered with the state and assigned as a designated caregiver, which is to say, I, Bentley, would be registered as a designated caregiver for each of my animals. And if I do not name a designated caregiver, the cost of each pet can go from $8.50 to up to $25 annually. There is no cap on the maximum level of taxation on a given household, and this would be addition to any other local taxes, such as getting dog or cat licenses. For those of you who deal with that where you live, I deal with dog licenses where I live in King County. So let's summarize briefly, because this is not the end of it. There is actually more to this. Let's say we have Leo, right? Leo moves to Colorado, doesn't know about this bill, and if this bill were to have passed, for every fish, for every puffer, for every whatever Leo has, the minimum it would cost him, if he properly registers with the state and assigns himself as the designated caregiver on each one of these, he would have to pay $850 for those 100 fish. But if you did not register as a caregiver, or maybe you didn't know that you needed to do that, that now inflates to $2,500 per year. And if you really want to know where it's crazy, right? And we're not even getting into chat. You're way ahead of me. Chat already knows where the nightmare scenario is coming in. But if you do not register, let's say that I were to move to Colorado and this bill had been passed, and I had no clue this bill was in place, and a police officer or something comes over to my home for some reason, maybe, whatever, maybe I need to report a break-in or something, and they come into my house and they see I have all these fish tanks, and they would go, oh, are you registered for all of these pets? And I go, what do you mean registered? Now I'm not registered. And if I'm not registered, the fine goes up to $100 per unregistered animal. Think about that for a second. If you had 100 fish, very easy with only a few fish tanks, we were talking small tropical fish, right? Easy with one tank of shrimp, because it counts in vertebrates. If you did not know about this and you did not register all of your pets, 100, just 100, would be a $10,000 fine. $10,000. Now, here's where this gets even crazier, right? Let's say, like, chat, you're way ahead of me, but think of things like blackworms, vinegar eels, guppies, shrimp, things that produce in mass. You have to pay. And one of the only other exceptions, because Alyssa brings up in chat, what about pets that you breed to sell? You still have to pay the yearly taxes, even if you are a registered breeder in the state. So if you're registered, all the paperwork required to do technically breeding animals legally for sale, you're still paying on every animal. Yeah, if we thought fish police on Facebook were bad, holy hell. So just think about that, right? Like, think about someone who's a good shrimp keeper, like the Garden of Eden, right? Think about how many shrimp they have. What if a bill like this were to pass? Now, thankfully, again, for those of you who joined a little late, it has been pulled. The sponsor of this bill got a lot of feedback very, very fast. And a lot of people, including US ARC and a number of other larger kind of collective lobbying groups, screaming at this congressperson. Which, by the way, if you are in Colorado, I feel that it's important to note that this bill was sponsored and introduced by Representative Regina English. So, normally I don't like to talk politics because I feel politics are a personal thing for people. However, if you're in Colorado, just remember that Regina English wanted to pass a bill that would charge you at a bare minimum $8.50 for every animal you own, including fish, invertebrates, reptiles, a guinea pig. And I mean, this, per the bill, pet animal means a dog, a cat, a rabbit, a guinea pig, hamster, mouse, rat, gerbil, ferret, bird, fish, reptile, amphibian, invertebrate, or any other species of wild or domestic or hybrid animal 6 months of age or older that is sold, transferred, or retained for the purpose of being kept as a household pet. That is some of the specific wording out of the bill. Sold, transferred, or retained for the purpose of being kept as a household pet. The only exempt animals considered livestock within the bill, because they call it specific animals, are cows, horses, mules, burros, sheep, poultry, swine, llamas, or goats. So even if in some regards, unless you specifically had things registered correctly with the state, because it does also call out other working animals on a farm or ranch or animals raised for food or fiber production. So if you are doing like a home aquaponics system where you're growing some of your own vegetables, you're growing tilapia to eat, if you did not register those tilapia correctly, even though they're only there for a food source, you're not keeping them as a pet, which has become more and more popular lately, you would owe, because you didn't register them, $100 on every single tilapia that you have. It's wild. It's wild. And there's some great comments in chat, like, my Plegos are just cleaning the tank, they are working animals. But I think about how crazy that is. Had that ever passed, and you know what it is? Often a state, there are a few states that are known for kind of being at the forefront of passing certain laws, and then a number of other states follow in line. Colorado and Washington are examples typically of your more progressive bills, such as when marijuana was legalized, as a great example, right? They were kind of the like guinea pigs, so to speak, the test subjects of passing those laws. And then other states realized, oh, they're making tons of money off of this, we should pass it too. And more states started passing those things. In this case, had a law like this passed, and especially had they been like, well, look at this massive increase in revenue we're having, how many other states do you think would follow in passing that law, that bill? Absolutely insane. Alishon says, sounds like a PETA bill, Pet Advocacy Network, formerly PIJAC, must be all over this. I wouldn't be surprised if in the background there were some kind of advocacy groups with nefarious purposes trying to put these things into place. But still, I mean, thankfully, like, an army of people spoke up very loudly. Very loudly, and this congressperson was like, I done goofed. Right? But, I mean, yeah. The bill's been pulled, so that's the good news. But I just want to think about, like, I think it's worth, when we talk about these things, how insane it is. Because Henry's got a great example. No one would pay it, right? No one would want to go and register and all that thing. But if for some reason, like as an example, they do pretty regular walkthroughs, the local Humane Society has people that walk, I think like every other year. They walk door to door. And if you come up to a door and a cat's meowing or a dog's barking, they'll ask you, can we see the licenses for your pets? Or did you know you need to have them licensed? Here's your paperwork. We'll come back and check with you in X amount of time, usually 30 days. Because if you haven't registered in that period of time, you'll be subject to a fine. And believe me, if it was something to where this pet passed, and for every pet you had, they can assess $100 per pet on a fine, especially with how broad and sweeping this ridiculous bill was written, they would employ people just to walk door to door and try everything they could to enforce that. So if you weren't registering, they're even more incentivized to basically police state you, which is insane. That's why I kind of like titled this dystopian nightmare, right? This is some Orwellian nonsense going on. Now, thankfully, the United States, most of Western civilization in general, we're pretty pet friendly, especially when it comes to like dogs and cats at a minimum. But man, yeah, think about if you were some kind of like, if you were in Colorado and you had a well-known business or YouTube channel, and the first person that comes to mind for me is Greg Sage, right? There's no way getting around it. It's publicly known that you do these things. So if you don't go and register everything, they're going to come get you. Right? Because they know it's easy money. And as we well know, the government will do anything it possibly can to get money out of us. Whether it's taxes or what have you, right? They're incentivized to come and hunt us down. But think about how wild that would be. Thankfully, when word gets out like this, it people step up and speak. And that's why one thing I would say is, out of all this, if anything's going to help you, usarc.org, I'll link them in chat real quickly. Every so often, especially for those of us in the United States, because this is a United States organization, but there are similar organizations in other countries as well. They are on top of this stuff like crazy. So they break news about these kind of crazy bills. There's all sorts of other things. Washington had some nonsensical thing recently that they tried to do, and USARC was all over it. But this is a good place to get this kind of news. And if it does happen in your state, they usually have automatic links that include form letters to easily send to your like senator or congressman, whoever the heck is sponsoring it, to, tell them, no, don't do this. Like, just don't do this. It's unreal. It's unreal how some of this stuff has become seemingly more and more frequent. Like, if you think about we had the Lacey Act amendments not too long ago, and those look really scary from a perspective of effectively banning all sorts of exotic animals from the kick, which included fish, and then forcing a government agency to whitelist or accept fish from there on out. Like, what kind of nonsensical crazy stuff would that be, right? But thankfully, again, for the last time, and then we'll get into Q&A after this, the bill has been pulled by its sponsor. But if you are in Colorado and you're watching and you want to think to yourself, who do I need to not vote for sometime soon? Regina English would be the person that sponsored this bill and might sponsor something else similarly insane in the near future. I know this is unfortunately like forces this conversation to be semi-political, and thankfully we can do it in a broad way and not have to get into like one side or the other, right? That part doesn't matter, but more the fact that legislations like this exist and or try to get pushed through for reasons we may never know. Like, why did Regina English think that this was a necessary thing? What we won't know. It's probably because of lobbying from some other interest group, whether it's like PETA or a similar organization that's very against the pet trade and pet hobby as general. But man, I see these kind of things, and they are it's just terrible to think that like there is a chance that something like this could have got pushed through. And how horrific would it be for so many of us that find so much peace, so much enjoyment in our pets, whether it's fish, dogs, cats, folks in the reptile side of things. Like I have a few friends that are big into reptiles, and that is one of the biggest parts of their joy and their relaxation when they get home, is being able to spend time with their pets. I know for a lot of us, it can be therapeutic to work in a fish tank, or just to sit and watch our fish swim, or observe our plants, maybe doing maintenance on your plants, whatever that may be. It can be extremely therapeutic. So thankfully, this bill was yanked, but I can't imagine how horrific something like this has the potential to be on not just the hobby, but on people's like mental health or financial health. I mean, think about that. If you're a fish keeper, or maybe you're even trying to like slightly breed some fish because it's part of your hobby, and all of a sudden you got to pay at least $8.50 for every guppy you own, or every shrimp you own, every snail. I mean, how wild is that? It would be almost impossible, or at least the cost to purchase those animals would skyrocket, right? Cora Works. Can we talk about some sane ways to register or regulate pet trade? We don't like the Lacey Act or Saving Nemo or this Colorado bill. What can we tell our elected reps we do? Passing wind. Jeez. I've been breeding Homo sapiens for years now. I mean, they do get amounts of taxes out of the pet trade, no matter what. Because for people that have to register as breeders, in the case of like dog breeders and cat breeders and things like that, they have to pay extra things, and plus there's inherent sales taxes that occur in states that have a sales tax. There's very few that don't have a sales tax, and then they usually have some kind of inherent income tax to supplement it anyway. But I think the biggest thing is there are problems where we've dealt with too many of invasive species being released into native habitats. As an example, mostly Florida has the biggest problem, but there is a type of snail that looks a lot like a Malaysian trumpet snail, and I'm actually working with a friend. So Rob from the Aquarium Guys podcast, for those of you who know him, I'm working with him on doing a video specifically on this particular topic, which is to say these snails. They're a they're a snail from New Zealand that is able to basically handle all sorts of ridiculous things and is very, very damaging. You're okay, puppy. You don't need to growl. Very, very damaging on waterways. And they've found it released in a few places, and where it got released unintentionally, it's something like 10,000 snails can live in a square meter area, and they just completely destroy the mud beds in these water systems. And there's no native like species that actually will predate on them, so it's all kinds of problems. Johnny from Dan's Fish, yeah, it's the New Zealand mud snail, which I think is the Melanius species, if I remember right. But yeah, I'm working with Rob to put together a more nicely edited interview video between the two of us to talk about that. We've been talking back and forth in some phone calls about it. So it's one of the things I'm working on. We'll probably start putting together like the filming stuff here relatively soon so we can get that video out and going. But I think it's important because there's not a lot of people talking about this problem. And similar to, if you guys remember the little zebra mussels that were coming in on the Marimo moss balls recently, it's a similar problem to that in that they're coming in kind of undetected on certain things. And the problem is they're far more invasive than those zebra mussels could ever be. So they're actually a much scarier threat, and most people will think that they're just a Malaysian trumpet snail when they absolutely aren't. Malaysian trumpet snails won't live in a lot of the colder native waterways in North America, but these mud snails will, and almost nothing can kill them. They're very, very, very durable little snails in the sense of like, it's not like they can release a simple chemical into the water that would affect only them. If they were going to affect anything, it would kill all the fish and everything in the waterway. So it's really, really a problematic species. And so I get why some of these bills like get framed up in the minds of some people that might be, whether they're like ecologically conscious and their end goal might be a good goal, which is like, I want to protect native waterways and all these kind of things. But then they go like crazy, like, $8.50 if you're registered. But if you don't register, it's $25, and if you didn't register at all, it's $100 a pet. Let's really get them. It's like, whoa, whoa. Leo, I got a cross river puffer. The cross river puffer is not going to live in a native North American waterway and deal with it. And if it does, it's probably going to be an even worse invasive species. Just saying. Just saying. Anyway, but yeah, that's a video I'm working on that'll talk about that particular topic. And I get why some of your people that can write these kind of bills, like how they might think this is a good idea, and then in the end it's like, no, this is actually like a freaking nightmare. But thankfully, most of these bills kind of get murdered because of enough outrage. Paul Saltero, we now have a use for copper pennies, New Zealand snail killer. So I actually think, if I remember right, it takes really high doses of copper to actually affect them, much higher than most standard snails. And that's where the problem is. One of the only things that they found to be really effective is a... Oh man, I'm trying to remember what it's basically the primary isolate that's in the the chlorine tabs, big quotation marks, are not actually chlorine, that they use for pools. And that stuff is like hyper aggressive, but it's one of the few things that will kill those snails on instant contact. but they can survive, basically put all the way into freezing temperature. So you have to get the water to 0 degrees Celsius. And they'll also survive in temperatures at something like 120 or something like that. Right? So they can basically the entire range of temperatures you would expect in a majority of North America. They can handle no problem. No problem. Very scary species. Anyway, we'll get into questions and answers. So if you do have a question, at Bentley Pasco makes it way easy for me to see it. We'll do that stuff. Feel free to be off topic, on topic, whatever you want. I don't care. But yeah. Yeah. Let me see here. I want to make sure I didn't miss anything super interesting while we do that. Legion Aquatics, did you turn that flex into an algae scrubber? I guess. Not really. It's empty. There was somebody like raging in my comments about how they're sad that I have a non-aquascape tank, and I was like, the tank's not even got water in it, man. What are you talking about? But I don't know. You get folks that don't necessarily come here every week, or maybe they watch on replay and they miss that part, whatever it may be. But yeah, that's gonna go away relatively soon. Trying to figure out the time and placement and all that kind of stuff because my storage space is running kind of low in my house too. Oh, such is life. Let's see. Bobby Ward, this is an upsetting topic. I really have a lot of disdain for the government. I know this sort of thing is not likely to be enforced, but the fact that it's being attempted is troubling. Yeah, and we kind of messed that, but I kind of want to reaffirm that, like, thankfully, even when people make these dumb moves, they have open lines of communication, and there are organizations like US ARC and some other ones that kind of alert hobbyists and portions of the trade side, right? To let them know, like, here's how you can contact them, here's the bill, here's the information. So there are good resources out there if you are concerned about this kind of stuff to be able to engage and politely, mind you, let's not like hurl death threats at these people or anything crazy like that, but politely tell them like how things like the fish hobby help your mental health, or maybe they give you maybe you're one of those people who dealt with addiction, and because of fish, you were able to get out of it. I know a few people that were either alcoholics or addicted to other types of drugs that, because of the aquarium hobby, were able to use kind of the therapeutic nature of aquariums as their crutch to get away from those addictions. And kind of, I guess, you might argue it's a different kind of addiction, but it's far healthier to be addicted to aquariums than it is, say, alcohol, right? But you know, there's so many like positive benefits to pets for people that are like big dog and cat lovers. I mean, you guys know how comforting it is when you're having a bad day and your dog or your cat just comes and like flops on you, because they know, you know, they have that emotional empathy to know that something's going wrong. In my case, like some of the most entertaining things I get for my fish are when I'll go into sit and kind of just watch my fish have their food for the day. I have what was it, a month ago, a little over a month ago, I got a bunch of Melanitania Gary Langi at a club auction. 12 of them to be precise, for a screaming deal. I paid $33 for all 12 of them. Screaming deal, less than $3 a fish. But you know, I put them into one of my 40 breeders, and for the first like week they were super shy, but now I walk in the room and all of them come out because they're in a tank. It's got tons of bulbitis and Java fern everywhere, so they got hiding spots all over the place. And they're still babies. They're still like an inch and a half, maybe 2 inches tops from the biggest ones, but they come like all out of the woodwork, right? And they're just like sitting swimming back and forth in front of the tank because they're like, oh, it might be food time, and it's like little things like that, right? There's little joys that we get in this hobby that are so important to many of us. And that doesn't include people who are like even trying to turn parts of their hobby into a business, folks that breed fish, or maybe you're doing plants for profit. Maybe you've got an aspiration to own a store one day, whatever that may be. But thankfully, like when these kind of things come around, there are ways to get alerted to them, and proper methods of communication, as long as it's done politely, again, to explain why this is a bad idea and what parts of your pet hobby, whether it's fish, shrimp, reptiles, maybe you're for some reason you're like, I'm only into salamanders, but they live in kind of aquariums, so I sort of watch aquarium channels. Whatever the heck it may be, right? How that hobby means to you and how it positively impacts your life, and then how a bill of whatever kind would negatively impact your life. They do listen. They are people deep down. I mean, we might not like them all the time, but deep down, they are still people. They will occasionally listen when enough voices speak up and go like, "Hey, man, I don't like that. I don't like that at all." Make sure I didn't miss something. Oh, Leo, the pupper doesn't finds that offensive. Yeah, well, I'm just saying, like, where some of these problems are. Hagen Hill design: one should always have a non-stocked tank on hand. I mean, sort of, kind of. It depends. If you're a person who's not actively bringing fish home, like I only brought home fish recently, the Gary Langai, because I knew I could move a singular fish out of one tank into a slightly bigger tank, and then that would free up a tank that otherwise only has a couple of plecos and like one. No, like I think there's like 3 autocyclists in it, right? So it's all clean crew fish, so I can bring in a new um, centerpiece fish for that tank and be fine. I think it depends on your point in the hobby. Like, if you're a person who's gotten kind of like me, where you don't really have room for extra tanks right now, and if you are bringing on a new tank, it means you've torn down a tank, so it's kind of just replacing that tank. It's more a matter of just knowing what part of the hobby. If you're still expanding, you're still constantly looking for something new and interesting. Maybe you're like Leo, you're always seeking that new puffer eye. Yeah, you might want a spare tank lying around. But if you're more like me, where you're kind of a stalemate until certain things can happen, then you're not necessarily worried about having that spare tank on hand, other than if you really needed to set up out of an emergency a hospital tank. But most people who've got like tanks that they're keeping for the long term, their systems end up pretty stable long term. Henry Rothschild, what are your thoughts about multi layers of substrate? 1-inch kitty litter, 2 inches of stratum, 2 inches eco complete, or fluorite. I usually put the lower levels in mesh bags to keep them apart. Okay, so mesh bags kind of doing what MD Fish Tanks does, and that can work very, very well. Me personally, I'm not too big on kitty litter in a tank, but to each their own, right? That's personal preference. It's mostly because I feel like I can get the advantages of the kitty litter using some other things that I just personally like a little better, whether it's aesthetically or from a perspective of some of the benefits I get are better, quotation marks. It's that's personal preference. But as far as like layering substrates, I've layered substrates in a number of different tanks now and found a lot of success. I think the biggest thing is understanding when a layer is too little and how those layers can start to blend together if you don't have certain amounts. So what I would mean is, like, let us say you had your layer of kitty litter, a big layer of stratum, and then a fairly thin layer, like only 1 inch of eco complete. Over time, as your fish manipulate that layer or whatever, or maybe you had less of a layer, you're trying to go for a purely aesthetic, like a growl or something over the top that you wanted for purely visual purposes. Over time, as your fish mess with things or you mess in the tank, whatever that may be, when you're working in there during water changes, it can disturb some stuff around. Those can start to mix together. So usually you want a relatively thick layer of each thing. 2 inches might be okay. You might actually want slightly more, but I would say you're not really hurting yourself if the stratum and eco complete mix together. I've done mixed stratum and eco complete many, many times in many, many tanks, and it's been extremely successful. I've done layered versions in a couple of different tanks. It's been very successful. So basically what I would say is it's all about execution. Using the mesh bags will help you keep those things separated. But if it's only to like bind up the kitty litter as an example, or only the stratum, you still have some risk of minor mixing, but I wouldn't stress too much with the amount of substrate you're trying to do. It just depends on how you're bagging it, where, and what's going to sit loose. Hope that helps. Hope that helps. Alyssa, you should see if you can raise Caridina malawa shrimp in the future pea puffer tank. Then you can rest easy knowing that they always have food. I mean, maybe, but I feel like you would have to get the malawa colony going really well ahead of time before you put the puffers in. And you'd probably have to account for some amount of substrate to help hide the baby shrimp. So they actually have opportunities for some of them to survive. Like a rock pile or something like that. Not a bad idea, though. We can see if brother-in-law James can keep shrimp going. Okay. Neo Veritas, any experience with peacock gudgeons being jerks in community tanks? I don't keep gudgeons for a reason. I've had a number of friends keep gudgeons, and inevitably they tend to be jerks, especially the peacock gudgeons. However, as Geek Boy is saying, he has a couple dozen peacock gudgeons in a 90 gallon. Never seen them bother any other fish. So I think what it comes down to is the size of the tank. Gudgeons can be territorial, but they keep a more limited territory. So if you're in a smaller tank, it's more likely that they could potentially bully or harass other fish in the tank. As you start getting to larger tank sizes, especially if you have plants and various shelters, so to speak, to break up line of sight and help the gudgeons feel like they have a particular territory to hold down, they're less likely to bother other fish outside of their kind of territorial range. And that territory is not that big in the grand scheme of things. So might be something you consider. Hopefully that kind of helps steer you in the right direction, Neo Veritas. Bob Purcell, can having Pothos in a tank drive nitrates so low that it causes algae blooms? I mean, in theory, yes. Right? If it's consuming so much of one thing and you still have, say, leftover phosphates or some other thing for the algae to kind of grasp onto as an excess that the rest of the plants aren't using and take advantage of, then yes, in theory, it can occur. So that would, I guess, depend on like your feeding regime and your dosing. Pothos is such an aggressive grower that I would think it's less likely, and you'd be more likely to see some kind of other bloom occur, like a bacterial bloom or something like that, if something had introduced that, spiked a parameter randomly or something. But it's still a potential, and it might be going on. Are you dealing with like a water algae, so like green water, or are you dealing with like hair algae? I guess would be my next question. Just to kind of narrow down what's going on. Make sure I didn't miss something cool. Legion Aquatics. Geek Boy, they're still people. Are you really sure about that? I mean, well, some of them are like walking corpses these days, but they are still people, yes. All my Legion Aquatics, all my tanks have green hair algae. No matter what I do, I can't get rid of it. My plants still grow really well and grow more than the algae, but I would like it all gone. Tips. I mean, if it's a perpetual problem, that's where I would start looking into using livestock that is an inherent algae eater, hair algae eater specifically, to help control those outbreaks permanently. So in some of my tanks where I get reasonable numbers of outbreaks, or I can expect an outbreak at a certain time of year because of how they do things with my like water system, as an example, I tend to keep things like Siamese algae eaters, or some of the types of nearite snails that will eat hair algae. If I were in a tank where I didn't have rainbow fish, I would consider something like a mono shrimp, because they actually can deal with hair algae. Florida flagfish is another good example, depending on what you're keeping. They're less likely to be bullies with certain fish than they are with like smaller, more shy fish. They can be a little territorial at times, but that's where I start looking into a livestock solution to fix the problem long term. If you don't want to use livestock, or if you've been using livestock and it's not enough, I would take a serious look at depth of your testing. And I know this is not exactly easy, but you can get a lot of the extra tests out there to test like your phosphates and things like that, to see if maybe something that you think is in balance is actually out of balance. And this is the difficult part, right? This is playing a much more difficult game. Maybe it's a matter of during certain times of the year, your lights are on too long, because certain plants actually do have dormant times of the year. And regardless of what light you throw at them, they just know what that dormant time is. They're not processing as much and thus the algae can start taking over. Little things like that. There are some weird, like, kind of niche scenarios, the kind of what we call an edge case in the quality assurance world of life that we could look into if livestock wasn't a potential fix to the problem, or if you were already using livestock that should be kind of keeping the problem in check. Da, 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 Toro works. How much do I have to pay for keeping a pet reptilian politician? I don't think any of us want to pay that much money because it's probably a lot. It's probably a lot. Geek boy, emotional empathy from cats. Bentley, stop going mushroom hunting with Alex. Oh man, funny part. I hate mushrooms. Don't like them. It's a texture thing. I like the flavor, but I don't like chewing on them or nothing. You gotta use them for a sauce, so you're okay. No, I've had plenty of cats that are very empathetic, but maybe it's just because it's the way I like train them from when they're really young. All my cats I've had as young kittens, and the ones that are kind of like my cats whenever I've been growing up, I've done everything from like having a fleece like pullover with a big central pocket in the front, right? I used to just take one of my kittens, and anytime we were hanging out or walking around, I would take the kitten as a baby and just stuff it in the pocket and have its head come out and just sit there and like support it with one arm, kitten in the pocket here, and just walk around. That cat got so used to just being like, anytime he was around me, just like flop on me and fall asleep. Did that all the way until he was like an old man. It was fantastic. I love that cat. But yeah, sometimes cats are jerks, but that's why we like cats, right? They got that attitude to them. It's like my dogs. My dog's got some attitude. Paul Sotero, I'm consolidating my Doedrii Gudiade colonies back into one tank so I can set a pair of Amoris Ivancara. Whoa. Hold on. See, when you start talking about, is that zebra Cara? I just spelled something wrong. No, that's the Ivancara. What is that? Which Akara is that, Paul? You're gonna have to tell me. I don't know. Sounds cool. Sounds cool. A lot of the Akaras are actually really cool fish. Alyssa, I'll send you a pic of my super fat pea puffer in one of my Caridina Malawa infested tanks. He's fat and sassy. Nice. My only concern is if a 20 is going to be enough to like keep the colony safe. I'm totally interested in trying it though. Do, 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 do. Let me see here. Leo 209. Having some black hair algae on my 135. You think it's the cheap light plus the good puff eats? It's probably because with what the puffer's eating, you're probably getting a higher level of phosphate in the tank. And phosphates plus blue light are like the magic combination to basically cause any blackbrush or blackbeard algae. They really take high advantage of excess phosphates in the water. Most algae do in general, but blackbeard algae especially is really good at capitalizing on it, at least in my experience. And then blue light, again, you might be getting too much blue light out of your economically friendly light. Let's say that instead of cheap. Because like it's all about timing and stuff. But you could go through and spot treat the blackbeard to take care of it, or try and find something that can live sustainably with the puffer while also being an algae grazer for you that's not a snail, so the puffer doesn't eat it. Kingfisher Sketch. How easy is it to convert a flooded basement into a stock pond for rainbows? Just asking for insurance purposes. I think the hardest part would be to heat that much water. Because, like, think about that. Whoever that guy is that has that like cellar in his house that he's turned into a massive pond, right? Or I think it's like a cellar or an old well or some kind of like storage bunker or something that he's got in his house. He like blew up on YouTube where he's got all his different like eels and he's got like a gar and stuff out there, right? And it's something like 4,000 gallons worth of water in this little this little underground cavern that he's got built that he's set up. Uh, the biggest problem there is like they can do fine because they don't mind cool water, and the being underground kind of sustains the temperatures somewhere in like that 50 to 60 degree range, no problem. Yeah, cistern. It's a cistern. Thank you, CoralWorks. It's in a cistern. Yeah, dude's a legend. But and his channel's pretty fun, right? Some of the stuff he's done, like when he was setting it up and getting it going, it was actually really fun to watch some of that stuff. Kind of similar to watching like Jeremy at Aquarium Domain. Watching him put together some of these monster tanks is super fun, right? Especially for those of us who are bad at DIY. Watching people who are good at it can be really, really fun. What is a cistern? So traditionally, cisterns were put into homes to capture excess rainwater so that during the summer you would have easy water sources available in your home. They're basically a rain recapturing system. It's really common to have a number of cisterns in places like Kentucky, as an example. But basically, it's an underground portion of your house that is designed to capture water and be kind of like a backup well, so that in certain times of whether it's crisis, mostly in the summer, when water levels are less accessible, for ye olden times, it's like having a rain barrel just kind of on steroids. That's what cisterns were designed for. And there's also larger versions of that. Aquarium Domain, lump me in with those cistern people. If you had a cistern, you would totally convert it into something nonsensical. I know you would. I know you would. Not necessarily like a sump. So it doesn't, you're not capturing wastewater. You're capturing specifically rainwater and excess groundwater. It's designed to prevent water from building up. Oh, I don't lump you in with the cistern people. Well, too late. Oh, man. Yeah, so most cisterns aren't necessarily meant to keep potable water, but they have been used historically for potable water. In times where we didn't know better. Let's put it that way. But yeah. Yeah. Anyway, so yeah, it's basically just a big like concrete bunker to capture water. That's what a cistern is. Today I found out, right? Legion Aquatics, I don't really have any hair algae eaters, but recently moved some Amano shrimp out of one of my tanks and had no hair algae, and that was one that did. So, yeah, I mean, just give them some time. The unfortunate part is they're kind of slow at tackling hair algae unless you have just a ton of them. But yeah. Yeah. California's flooded. Yeah, dude, California, man, you guys have got hit last 2 years in a row pretty hard with some really bad rain that's caused flooding. Because this, in general, the infrastructure is not, of a lot of California, is not designed to handle the amount of water that has been falling lately for you guys. It's more recent than, historically speaking, a common occurrence. Otherwise, there'd be better infrastructure to handle it. Aquatic Moose, you should go tour the eel pit next video. He's like halfway across the country. It would cost me a lot of money to do that. I forget rain barrels. Build me a giant gray water system under my house. I mean, there's risks to having the gray water systems under your home too. Don't get me wrong. Don't get me wrong. Oh man. Josiah, thank you so much for bringing up the Colorado Law. I'm normally replay crew, but had to come in because I saw the title. Yeah, it's. Thank you for the comment, by the way. It's wild to think that. I mean, who knows who like actually kind of put this in the ear of that particular congressperson, but it's wild to think that anyone would build a bill and think that it wouldn't get them like absolutely raged at when it's potentially $100 an animal with almost no exceptions, where it's like even invertebrates. Like, so if I've got snails in my garden, are they considered pets? And slugs and stuff, or what? Like, good lord, good lord. Arnhem, did you hear Murphy the Mabu Puffer passed away? What? Hold on. Uh, no way. Did he actually pass? I know he's been having some health issues, but I did not know that he passed. I'm looking. Is there something on like the forums about it? I don't go to the aquarium co-op forums super often anymore just because I have not had time. Where did that get announced? Passed away a couple days ago. Oh my. It's so funny. So, well, I mean that's not funny. Let's be clear. Losing Murphy's unfortunate, but to be fair, with our understanding of what Mabu Puffer's age is, Murphy was kind of old for a captive puffer. Because Corey's had Murphy for basically as long as I've been back in the hobby, right? And there's a sign on the front of his tank. Oh, that's so sad. That's so sad. Oh, that was such a like happy fish. I loved going to see Murphy. Man, that's sad. That's really sad. Is that why you can't find like the Murphy Cam link anymore? It's like it's not easily accessible. Yeah, they haven't updated anything on their website as far as that's concerned. That's so sad, man. You know that's got to hurt Corey too, because that's his buddy. Notice on the tank. That's so sad. That's so sad. But I think his plan is to bring Ladybird into the shop with the new tank. Um, and then he'll probably get another Mabu Puffer at some point, just because he loves Mabu Puffers. That's his jam. I was grocery shopping last week, and I have one of the big Murphy Puffer hoodies that I gave to brother-in-law James, because he likes hoodies. I'm not generally a hoodie person, but he likes them. So I got one for him. Yeah, he was over 10. Yeah, he was old for a puffer, because captive puffers, you don't usually see huge, like huge. We put this in quotation marks. Ages on them. It's like 5 to 7 years is more common, right, with a captive puffer. Um, yeah, yeah, yeah. She's talked about moving Murphy, potentially like bringing him home, so that was happening. That's so sad. I'm gonna have to go to the co-op just to pay my respects, so to speak, because that's unfortunate. I used to love going to see Murphy. Every time I go to the store, I would go and see Murphy, no matter what. Didn't feed him every time, because plenty of other people fed him, but I would always go say hi for a few minutes. Anyway, we were at the grocery store, and he's wearing the hoodie, and there's a particular person in our local grocery store who is into at least certain fish, and they're like thinking about becoming a fish keeper. So every time they always comment on his hoodie whenever he's wearing it. And we were kind of explaining that it's like the mascot of the Aquarium Co-op, which is a store that's in Edmonds, and I happen to be wearing like my Aquarium Co-op hat at the same time on that particular trip. So it's kind of surreal to know that now the mascot that's sitting on that sweatshirt is no longer with us. That's a shame. Josiah, thank you very much, man. I really appreciate that. Oh, what a way to end. Like I've had kind of a wild week, and it's barely started at work. So that's what a way to end, knowing that One of the probably the most famous fish on YouTube is no longer with us. Do we think that's right to say the most famous fish on YouTube? I mean, I don't even think that necessarily Joey's arowana was more famous, right? Because he's always kind of had multiple. It's not like the arowana has been the entire like mascot of a company and YouTube channels. I would argue that was the most famous fish on YouTube, right? I mean, chat, tell me if I'm wrong, but what a shame. But at the same time, and think about it, basically 10 years old for a Mabu puffer. To my understanding, the average lifespan is like 5 to 7 years. So to get him to survive that long, pretty impressive. Fu the flowerhorn, I mean, yeah, I would argue Murphy's more famous than Fu the flowerhorn. Fu the flowerhorn we know for a channel and doing lots of things, but like you don't see it like branded on like hats and things like that, and know that like when you were to go to the store, you could always go see Murphy, and then he's like the mascot, right? Fu's pretty close though. I think you're talking like this, right? You could argue one way or the other. It just depends on like what you watch more. But man, sad day. Rest in peace, Murph. We nomming on the all the clams in the great aquarium in the sky. Nemo, mic drop. Nemo's not a real fish. All right, it's a fabrication. Baby Zenny, you're done. You're fired. Get out. Oh man, baby shark. Jeez, jeez. All right, all right. Gang. On this somber note, I will say I want to thank you all for being here. Thank you for being part of the conversation. Let's hope that no other state tries to pass some crazy law like this, and that they all get just absolutely snuffed out before they get anywhere near close to that level of scary paranoia. But as always, gang, thank you so much for watching, and stay awesome. Rest in peace, Murphy. What a shame.